Hi, I'm Daniel Kellogg, president of Young Concert Artists, and today we are delighted to have a conversation with saxophonist Steven Banks. Steven is the first ever saxophonist to join the YCA roster, and he came on the roster last November from the 2019 YCA International audition. Steven, welcome.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Hey. Well, thanks for being here. So, the first question I'm asking everybody is, can you tell us where you are and where have you been these last 4 months?
Sure. I am hunkered down here in Freeville, New York, right outside of Ithaca, where I teach at Ithaca College. So I've enjoyed nature out here, which is really a great aspect of this region of the country. And yeah, trying to stay busy.
So you were in the middle of a teaching semester. So you are a professor at Ithaca College. And so obviously your life didn't suddenly stop. In your teaching role, what happened with your students in Ithaca?
Well, we had to make a lot of changes very quickly to basically finish out the entire rest of the semester online. And so that means online juries, that means online scale exams and things like that. So and we also had the good opportunity to have a lot of guest artists actually for our students that could zoom in and do interesting classes and things like that. So there were some definite challenges with the changeover, but it was also really sort of an exciting time to see what all the possibilities were.
Had you taught one-on-one lessons on Zoom before this pandemic?
Definitely not. I'd done a couple of Skype lessons when Skype was still really a thing. But other than that, I hadn't done much online teaching.
So what were some of the early lessons? Was it an easy transition? Do you like doing it online?
I wouldn't say I like it, but I've figured out some ways that I feel like it's still really effective for my students. But one of the things that I really miss about the in-person instruction is just being able to really get in there and, guide a student's finger to the right key at the right time and really demonstrate certain things like vibrato or tone color in person. Or I also often play the piano, light accompaniment with my students, and being able to do that is, completely off the table when you're not in the same room. So, but that gives us lots of other opportunities to talk about things in the industry and to and really for me to get to learn more about my students. I enjoyed doing some or giving them some assignments where they were doing reflections on different things that they were listening to. And that was really insightful for me to learn more about how they work. And so there were definitely some good things that came out of it.
Well, I've been sort of fascinated from a distance to see you embrace the technological side of it. I know that you've been very proactive, sort of getting microphones, getting lighting, camera equipment. Do you enjoy that part of it?
I've come to enjoy it. I think what I enjoy is learning new things. And so in this time, we've all had to learn so many new things. And in order to do those things really well, you need equipment. You need the cameras and the lights and all that kind of stuff. And so I think I've found enjoyment because I've opened up a whole new world that I had no idea about at all. All of my friends, I think if you ask them, they would say I'm not a tech savvy person at all. So it's been fun to sort of try to challenge myself.
Well, that's great. Do you think that the finishing the semester online, has it taught you something new about teaching and engaging with students?
Yes, I think that it's made me really value the time that I do have with my students in person a lot more. I don't think I'll ever take that for granted again. But I think it's also taught me in some ways about the things that we can do whether we're in the same room or not, and so I think that it's opened my eyes to some of the things that we don't always get to in lessons, things about just like the real world, of music that we don't necessarily talk about in lessons all the time because we're always working on the next thing. So it's been valuable for me to have a chance to talk about some of those things with my students as well, when I might not have had that opportunity to otherwise.
Oh, that's great. And as you look ahead, is Ithaca making plans to do online education in the fall? Is that the current plan?
Yeah, currently we're going to be online, I think, for mainly the month of September. And then we're hoping to actually come back in person in October. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that everything will work for that plan.
Oh gosh, I hope that does work. It'd be wonderful to be able to see people and meet face to face.
Right.
So let me shift gears and talk to you about the saxophone as an instrument. When you auditioned, you played on the soprano, on the alto, and the baritone. So the one that you didn't play that particular time was the tenor, but you came out on stage with a whole collection of instruments. How is it possible that saxophonists can change between instruments so easily?
Well, on the surface level, I think that they are actually, all of the saxophones have the same fingerings, more or less. You know, we do some different alternate fingerings for pitch and things like that. But all of the saxophones more or less work the same. But I would, as a saxophonist, you know, I would also say that you could sort of think about, in the string family, violinists that can play viola and cello and perhaps even a little bit of bass. The relationships between the notes and the relationships between the way that you blow into the instrument definitely changes the further down you go. So it in some ways is rather easy to switch, in terms of, like, you're not going to play the wrong notes, but you do still have to have a lot of awareness and be immediately able to shift on a dime when you pick up the next instrument, because you'll have all sorts of different pitch tendencies. The way you get a beautiful sound out of it is really different. All the way down to the music that you play will require you to have different types of musical approaches. So I played my piece, As I Am, on baritone saxophone, and the type of sound I'm trying to get out of that instrument is completely different than when I played the Mozart Oboe Quartet on the soprano saxophone. So as much as it's a technical difference, it's also just like a mindset change that has to happen. So yeah, it might be easier than some instruments, but there are also its unique set of challenges too.
Is it, when you think about air and the column of air, is it a completely different way of breathing for the higher pitch versus the lower pitch, the top of the register and the soprano versus the baritone?
So the airflow and everything is about the same, but I would say that
Oh, it is.
yeah, we actually have something that we call voicing, which is the way that we use our tongue and oral cavity to shape the sound that's coming out of the instrument. And the way that you use those mechanisms on soprano versus baritone is very, very different. So on the soprano saxophone, you might keep your tongue really, really high all the time, try to keep really fast air. And as you go down, you can sort of relax that position.
Okay. And what is it about the saxophone at its core that attracts you to the instrument? I mean, if you were going to talk to a layperson about why you love this family of instruments, what would you say?
Yeah, I think that there's so many wonderful things about the saxophone. I think one of the things that I was initially drawn to is the singing quality of the instrument. Like, I feel that I know everyone says that their instrument sounds like the human voice. Everyone says that, but when I play the saxophone, it feels like my human voice. You know, I'll say that. And so I feel like it can. I think there's a quote actually by Berlioz and he says that the saxophone cries, sighs, and dreams. And I think that it absolutely does all of those things. We can make the really shrill cries, you know, that you might hear in like John Coltrane playing A Love Supreme or something like that. But we can also sigh, and we can have a dreamy tone, and we can have all different types of things. So I love the versatility. And like we were just talking about, I love the fact that the versatility is not only on one instrument, but it's expected of us to be able to play all four and maybe even more. So the possibilities of what you can play are almost endless when it comes to the saxophone family. So that's really what I love about it.
No, that's great. I know when you auditioned, it was just looked effortless, the transition from one piece, one instrument to the next. But recently you said actually it involves quite a bit of, you said there's a mindset shift. What are the other challenges in changing instruments on stage between pieces?
Oh, sure. So the biggest practical one is actually the fact that we have reeds. And so our reeds need moisture to work, to vibrate really well. And so while they're sitting on stage, they could just dry up, and then you go to play and nothing comes out. I was really worried about that. I can tell you that. But there are ways around it. So you probably noticed that I put a mouthpiece cap on each instrument when I would finish with another one. And I had a little piece of sponge in there that had some, that was slightly wet.
Moisture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I would put down. So when I started with soprano, then went to alto, then went back to soprano, so that the reed would still be wet. And then on baritone saxophone, because the reed is so large, it's really easy for that reed to get what we call warped during a performance, even while you're playing sometimes, because there's just so much cane there that it can change really quickly. So I actually use a synthetic baritone saxophone reed. So it's not made of cane. It's actually made of like a really, you could think of a high quality plastic, basically.
Okay.
So there are all sorts of little shortcuts here and there to try to thwart that just practical problem of the reeds drying out.
When you say cane, that's the actual wood that a reed is traditionally made from?
Yes, and it comes from a plant that's similar to bamboo called Arundo donax.
Where does that grow?
Well, I don't know too much about the details, but I do know that it grows in the southern region of France, because I think that the Van Doren Company, which has made saxophone and clarinet reeds for many, many years, I think that their farm, if you will, is in southern France, but it might grow in other climates as well.
Okay. Well, I'm fascinated by the instrument as a composer. I'm a little embarrassed that I haven't had as much experience with it as I'd like, but just a fabulous sound with an incredibly wide expressive range, as you've already talked about. And in particular, I mean, your loud notes fill a room, almost in the way that nobody but a very big voice could fill a room. And yet your soft stuff is as soft as, the lightest touch on a violin. I mean, it's an incredible expressive range. So there's so much potential there. Right before we began, you and I were talking a little bit about your debut program, which will be taking place in March, and we'll be live streaming it around the world. And so we hope everybody tunes in. But I was sort of celebrating or impressed with the fact that you have 3 world premieres on your debut program. And so we should probably talk. We've already done a whole interview about the piece that Saad Haddad, the YCA composer in residence, is writing for you. But let's talk about you writing for you. And you are one of the wonderful performers who compose. How did you come to actually begin composing?
Well, I have some friends actually that encouraged me to start writing my own music. And these friends of mine are actually not classical musicians. They might come from, being like a singer-songwriter background or pop music, those types of things. And, I was talking about some of my struggles with like performing, and it's like, sometimes I just wish I could do whatever I want when I get on stage and just take my own liberties and all that. Where they're like, well, maybe you should just write your own music. And I thought about that. I was like, oh no, writing music's only for like geniuses. You have to be like Beethoven or Brahms or something to even think about writing music. But then I think after a few months, it settled in, and I started getting this bug and this itch to just sit down at a piano and start creating. And that sort of coincided with a time in my life that was really transitional. So when I was leaving grad school, and I think I was having the existential crisis that everyone has when they get out of school. They're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life? And so composing and writing music was a way for me to like think through that whole situation, and the changes that I had found in my own life. And that's how the piece, As I Am, which is written for baritone saxophone and piano, really came about. It's sort of just a stream of consciousness piece. And
is that your first composition?
it was, yeah.
Wow, it's a fantastic piece. We'll put a link in the comments.
Yeah,
wow,
thank you.
Congratulations. I interrupted you. Carry on.
No, yeah, that was my first piece, and I wrote it all by hand and sent it to a friend that told me that he could engrave it, because I had no idea how to use, Sibelius and finale and all of that. And it's interesting that you were remarking that's my first piece, because I definitely didn't realize the complexities of it when I wrote it, because I was just sort of writing what I was feeling. And this friend of mine that actually transcribed it and put it into the computer was pointing out to me all of these theoretical things about it that he thought were so interesting. And I was like, oh, I mean, I had no idea. I just wrote it. Talking about all these relationships of key areas and all of that. And I was like, cool, great. So I think actually since the YCA auditions, I felt a lot more pride, in my own writing. And I'm really thankful for that, because it's been exciting to sort of go now to the piano with more of a sense of confidence, and thinking that, okay, whatever, I come up with, what I have to say is important. And I would actually urge other performers to try it. It doesn't have to be a full piece by any means. It can just be something for fun, but it really, really opens up your eyes in a creative way.
That's great. I think it's a wonderful thing for performers to do. So you've answered some of the question about process, but you write at a piano with pencil and paper. And is it, how to ask the question, does time fly by? Is it like hitting your head against the wall? Is it wonderful most of the time, or difficult with occasional moments of breakthrough?
Well, I think my process has actually changed quite a bit since I first started. So now I have the pen and paper there, but I also have my computer out with Sibelius, and I'm sitting at my keyboard, which I've hooked up to the computer so I can do entry by playing things on the keyboard, which has made my life way better. But in terms of the creative process, I think that with this piece that I'm writing now, which I'm calling A Gift of the Spirit, that the title may or may not change, my approach has been much more methodical. So I've been now outlining the form of the piece. I actually had a long conversation again with Saad Haddad about form and how he works through that. And I spoke with the composer Joel Thompson, who's one of my favorites, about that. And so I've been really sort of mapping out the form so that my actual writing process will be a little bit more streamlined, and so that I'll get to less of those places where I'm banging my head up against the wall, like, well, I don't know what to write now. It's sort of like, okay, I need to write this exposition-like material, and I know what I want the melodic content for that to be, and then I'll go to some sort of development, or those types of things, which has actually made it a rather pleasant experience this time around. So.
Well, you mentioned the name of the work. Sorry, I'm just looking over it. So, Gift of the Spirit. So, can you tell us about? So, this is a brand new piece. I think the idea only came about 3 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is that right?
Yeah, in a
Tell us
way.
about.
So, sure. So, I've actually had this idea in the back of my mind for maybe a year. But when this opportunity presented itself, I thought, okay, I think this is it. I think this is the time to actually write it. And so the idea is to take spirituals, traditional Negro spirituals, um, that have been chosen by each of my immediate family members, and use those as inspiration for a 4-movement sonata type piece. And so the 4 that I ended up coming out with were My Lord, What a Morning, which is from my sister Jennifer; Wade in the Water, which is from Ashley. I have 3 sisters. And His Eyes on the Sparrow, which was from Karma. And then I Still Have Joy, which is my mother's favorite spiritual. And actually, I Still Have Joy is more of just a gospel song, not exactly a spiritual, but in the same vein. And so I decided to take those spirituals and use them as the melodic content for the piece. So one of the things that I'm really excited about with it is that I'm actually taking the original intent of spirituals, which was to allow slaves to communicate with each other in a way that not everyone would understand, so that they could send subliminal messages basically to each other. And I'm trying to sort of implement that into the piece. So the spirituals, the melodies are not going to be completely obvious at all times. But if you know the tune, if you really have heard it and you're sort of deeply connected with it, then you'll always be able to follow it. But from an outsider perspective, it might just sound like something neo-romantic. And so that's something that I'm sort of playing around with, which has been sort of exciting to get even a little bit deeper beneath the surface of these great works.
Will we get each tune in its entirety at least once? I mean, is there a moment they sort of rise to the surface and then they go back under the surface again?
I won't make that promise, but I know that there will, at least His Eyes on the Sparrow will be presented pretty close to its original form, probably with reharmonizations and things like that. But there won't be a time where you hear it just as a statement of the main melody. The rhythms will be changed. Primarily, the harmonies will be changed, and sometimes that will mean that the melody has to change just a little bit. But it's all coming from a place of inspiration from those spirituals.
And how long have you had a relationship with these melodies, these songs?
I've had that relationship since I was, as far back as I can remember. My first musical experiences were all in the church. And in my church, we started with something called devotionals. And many times, devotionals are basically at the beginning of the service. We say anyone that has something on their heart can come up to the front of the congregation and just start singing, and everyone will sing along with them, and then it's really a great experience. And many times the things that people would choose to sing in those situations were spirituals about overcoming negative times, or being able to get past this next thing that might be coming up in your life that will be really difficult. So they've been deeply a part of my life, musical life, for forever.
It's fantastic that you're integrating these into this composition now, or basing this piece on it. I think it's something that every composer has, that your earliest musical experiences form like a DNA, which you don't even understand how it infiltrates everything else until maybe you're partway through your musical professional life and you slow down to think about it. But those, even just a little melodic fragment that you internalized early on may be with you forever. And
Right.
Have you discovered new things about these spirituals in the process of writing this, things that you didn't know before?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the interesting things is that I think the thing that has been most illuminating for me is just really reading the text of them, because I'm used to hearing the melodies of them and not actually always listening super deeply to how all of the verses work and all of that kind of thing. And that's probably why I'm a saxophonist and not a vocalist. Because I really latch on to sound and melody and harmony, those types of things. And so hum along and I know most of the words, but doing this, I've had to really look and see, what do all of these really mean? And what are those subtextual references that they're talking about in this? Because I think I took that for granted growing up, and I just knew these as songs that I heard all the time. So it's interesting. I've actually gotten to know more of their original intent by diving deep into them now.
Well, here's a question to put you on the spot a little bit. I'm fascinated when a piece comes out of an oral tradition and it gets handed down over decades, maybe even centuries. And there's obviously a lot of hymns, spirituals that didn't last. They fell by the wayside. So what is it about a melody that is so good that it actually sort of takes hold in a consciousness and gets passed down? Could you articulate it? Is that...
Well, I don't know exactly. I think it's different in different contexts, I would imagine, because if we're talking about a melody from, Beethoven or Rachmaninoff or Grieg, those have a very different type of timeless quality than in comparison to a traditional spiritual melody. So I think that it probably has something to do with that melody's connection to the people that it's meant for.
Okay.
So if we're listening to a romantic period or even classical period sonata, most of the people that would be hearing those pieces at first would be familiar with that form, because they were so used to hearing it. And so when a composer would do something a little bit interesting with the exposition, or do something really interesting with the recapitulation or something, everyone would latch onto it and say, wow, that was really, really interesting. And so for like the traditional spiritual realm, I think that maybe the ones that we remember the most are the ones that had the most meaning for us. So ones that might have been used on the Underground Railroad, specifically, that, when Harriet Tubman was bringing slaves to freedom. I think those might be deeply entrenched in some people's, psyche at a certain point, or ones that deeply connect with us as individuals. That's just the hypothesis, I don't know. But I think it has, all of these things have different meanings for different people at different times, even throughout history. So.
Well, I can't wait to hear this piece. How far into the writing process are you?
Well, there are about 2 minutes of actual music done right now, but I've
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. I've pretty much completely mapped out the form that I'm looking for, and accounting for all 20 minutes of it. And now I'm really working on the relationship with the text, and how I want to highlight different aspects of the text in a musical way, so that I can keep bringing those things back throughout the piece, so it sounds cohesive.
Well, it's really fantastic that you're writing a brand new piece for your own debut, and I really hope people tune in March. I mentioned you have 3 premieres on this recital. What's the third one that we haven't talked about yet?
Right. I'm also really excited about this piece. It's going to be called Hear Them, and it's by the composer Carlos Simon. And this had a really, really interesting way of coming about. We were sort of going back and forth about what we wanted the piece to be about, and we both passed some poems back and forth just to think about some inspiration. But when it really came down to it, I'm very picky. And so I was talking to Carlos about, well, what type of thing do you think you want out of this? I think I want it to be sort of a lyrical piece. I'd like for it to, have all of these different characteristics. And he said, well, what really needs to happen is we need to get in the same room and just improvise together. We need to just play together. Unfortunately, the pandemic was happening, so we couldn't do that.
So that
Right. So that never happened. But in a way that I've never experienced before, we found a way to do that anyway. So Carlos actually just sat down at his piano at home and improvised 3 little snippets of things that were probably like 3 to 5 minutes long. And he's an amazing gospel pianist, and he's actually amazing as a player. And so he just recorded some things and sent them to me, and he was like, just see what you can do with this. And so I took those, and it actually took quite a bit of time to sort of figure out everything that he was doing, but then I overdubbed a saxophone part on top of that. And it was so cool what came out of it, because it was using the best of his strengths as a player and the best of my strengths as a player, and putting them together into this piece. And then after that, he took those recordings and used those as his inspiration for writing the piece. And yeah, that was a really, really cool experience, and some of the most exciting music actually that I've heard is when I listen back to those recordings. I think, this is what I want to play. This is the kind of stuff that I want to be playing. So I'm really excited to premiere that one as well.
Is that piece completed already?
Pretty much. It's pretty much done, and now I think he's putting the final touches on it and formatting and everything like that.
That's fantastic. I do want to mention that it's a co-commission by Washington Performing Arts and Young Concert Artists. And when you started on the roster, you just said, I want to help commission pieces. And so we came up with a project. I'm so excited that it's come together.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. What you've already answered this a little bit, but what is it like to premiere something that doesn't exist in a recording? No one else has brought it to light. I mean, in this case, because you had these, I guess, sort of quasi-improvisations, you've already experienced the piece in some capacity, but I'm one of those sort of people that believe that a piece doesn't really exist until you share it with an audience. Mm-hmm. Until then, it's all sort of theoretical. So what's it like to premiere something brand new?
Well, it's a big responsibility, I think. And that is actually why I always try to get to know, on a personal level, all of the composers that I'm working with. Because when I bring their piece into the world, I feel like I need to do their work justice, because I know that they've thought about it, for hours and hours and hours, and sometimes months and sometimes years, and that it's really personal for them. So when I bring it to the stage, I want it to be everything that they could have possibly imagined and more. And I think that that's one thing that, as a composer myself, it's something that I really sort of identify with them. Like, even when I'm playing my own things, I'm just extremely nervous because it's like, this is more me. When I'm playing my own, this is more me than me playing anyone else's piece. So it feels very sort of exposing in a way. But when I play another composer's works, I want to be thinking about their humanity, just like who they are as a person, and bringing that forth to the stage so that people can really connect with it, not only on that, theoretical level, like you were saying, but on a personal, like heart to heart sort of level. So it's a big responsibility.
Well, that's very cool, and I think it's great that you have 3 world premieres on your debut program. Because you've started talking about collaboration, and you sort of light up when you talk about working with other artists. You have started something it's all about collaboration. Could you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. So, in the spirit of all of the virtual things that are going on, I started a series that I'm calling Curious Dyads. And basically, it's a vlog that has a performance element at the end of each episode. And so I'm starting by working with different members of the YCA roster. So the first episode was with flutist Anthony Triunfo. And the upcoming episode is going to be with Bella Ristova, who's a violinist on our roster. And it's really, really exciting because I basically try to give whatever the other artist is their chance to do whatever they want, basically have the ultimate gig. Because I think a lot of times we end up performing pieces that it's like, oh, the presenter wants us to play this, and then maybe it'll work best with that. But this is an opportunity for us to just get to know each other. So we do a nice little 20 to 30 minute chat. And then at the end of the episode, I play something with them that they have totally chosen on their own. So there are all sorts of different types of music that are going to be featured in this series. So the first episode was a piece by Bozza that was originally for flute and oboe that we did for flute and soprano saxophone. On the next episode, we're doing a traditional set of Bulgarian folk music that's going to be for violin and soprano saxophone, which actually Bella arranged. And it's going to be really, really cool. I'm super excited about it. And I've also spoken with a few people that wanted to do things like jazz and all of that. So like you said, I really enjoy connecting with other artists and learning about what makes them tick. And so this is a great opportunity for me to do that. And also, learn from all of these great musicians as well, because I love to learn from them in terms of what they're talking with me about, but also learn from them every time I play with their recording, because everyone has their own special tendencies and things. So it's a great experience for me.
The first episode was just fantastic. I can't wait to see the rest. And who knows how long it will go for. It's called Curious Dyads, and dyad being, I guess, a 2-part conversation or a pair.
Right. Yeah. So there's curious and dyads. And so curious refers to the fact that both artists are going to be learning from each other and learning things about the process of creating something like that. And also refers to the fact that these duos are pretty odd, because you don't often think of, classical saxophone and flute, classical saxophone and accordion, or classical saxophone and whatever other instrument. So they might be unique experiences for the listeners. And then dyads is really just referring to the fact that there are 2 people there. And also we use the word dyad to describe 2 notes in music that are happening simultaneously.
And we'll mention it at the very end of the interview where people can follow you. But just right now, these episodes are on YouTube. And if you look up Steven Banks Saxophone, you'll find your YouTube channel, which will have all these episodes.
Sure.
I realized all the things that we haven't had a chance to talk about, but I want to at least hear a little bit more about your working life as a musician, because we've mentioned that you are a full-time professor at Ithaca, where you're working with music majors, saxophonists. You also are obviously a soloist and a chamber musician, and joined our roster last November. you're a regular with the Cleveland Orchestra, is that
Yes.
correct?
Hmm.
You're sort of the saxophonist they call whenever they need a saxophone in the ensemble or as a soloist. Is that right?
Well, in the ensemble for sure, and I, I wouldn't say that it's hard to it's sort of tricky because it's not a position per se, but I've
Okay.
definitely developed a great relationship with that orchestra, and I absolutely love playing with them because um, they just have so much finesse in everything that they
Yeah.
do, and so I've learned a lot in playing with them. So yeah, it's a good relationship, but there's no saxophone position on the roster
Okay.
for that
But
orchestra.
you're somewhat regular. All right. And
Right.
then in addition to all of that, you're active as a composer. And then you've become a bit of a video producer in recent times. Um, and you play with a saxophone quartet. What's the name of your saxophone quartet?
It's the Canary Quartet, and that's Kenari. Yeah. And
Okay,
we
so here's
have,
the question. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was just going to say, we've actually been around for since about 2012, and those are some of my best friends in that group. So
Did you all form in grad school or undergrad or?
we formed at Indiana University when I was in undergrad, and we were sort of all of different ages. So some people were in grad school, some were a little older, and some were younger. So
Okay. So putting all that list together, how do you balance this out? I mean, how are you developing a career and deciding what you're supposed to work on this afternoon, tomorrow morning, next week?
well, I would say that it's very difficult, and I wouldn't say that I've always figured it out. I think that's sort of the fun part of it. Is the fact that there's never a dull moment. I can definitely say that. Um, but I think it sort of goes with the territory of playing in, air quotes, untraditional, non-traditional instrument. And so one of the things I think that I thought about, even a few years ago, was just the fact that I have no idea how my career might go forward. And so I'm interested in all of these different things. I legitimately, completely love all of these different things. Um, and so why close any doors? And so I've kept them all going, and I've just been incredibly lucky because all of them have had some sort of success. And
Hmm.
I don't know if I was expecting that. um, when I was getting out of school, I definitely wasn't expecting, for example, to be a composer. Um, I, I wasn't expecting to be writing something with a deadline ever in my life. But they sort of grow organically out of the experiences that I've had, and so um, I've been really lucky in that regard. And when it comes to balancing them, I think my personal workflow is usually getting really focused on one thing and going really, 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 really hard at it until I've reached that goal, reached whatever that deadline is, and then saying, okay, ooh, I'm tired from that. Let me do this other thing over here that I'm really, really passionate about for a little bit. So I sort of go on excursions into each one of these different paths.
Well, it's wonderful to watch from afar as you juggle all the different things. And obviously, the pandemic has changed some of it for the moment, and you've certainly filled your time with new efforts and new things. I want to mention just that at Young Concert Artists, our mission is to find people like Steven and support them in getting their careers and their professional lives begun. And to see you get on stage, get around the world, find people to collaborate with, that's really what we're here to do. And it's a joy to watch all the things that you're working on. When the pandemic began, we imagined a new fund called Keep Our Artists Working, which is to help support YCA artists doing activities right now when there are no live concerts. And so I know we've approved it. I think we have to get you money, but we're giving you money to support Curious Dyads. I think there's a computer as part of that, and then money to recognize the time that you're putting into it. And it's amazing to see you find a new way to share a bit about what it is to collaborate and make music, and find a creative way to share that online, the kind of thing that you could never see on a concert stage. So we're really excited about it. We invite people who are watching to learn more about YCA by going to our brand new website, www.yca.org. It just launched this past Monday, and learn more about our Keep Our Artists Working Fund. Steven, where can people actually learn more about you, hear your performances, follow everything that you're up to?
Sure. Well, my website is steven-banks.com. I have a blog on there, and more information and performances about from me. And I'm also on Facebook at Steven Banks Saxophone, and on Instagram with the same handle, Steven Banks Saxophone. So I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to get messages and everything like that. So I'd love to get connected with everyone out there.
Thanks. And we're going to put several links of performances, certainly As I Am. We can put the link in the comments, and your website and other things. You've got some wonderful performances online, and boy, we'll talk again. There's so many other things that we could talk about, but it's so great to hear about the new pieces and projects you have coming up. So Steven, thank you so much for talking today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye-bye.